Hello, and welcome to the 100th episode of the Abundology podcast. My name is Renee Spears, and I am so excited today to talk with one of my favorite guests, Cara James, who is an intuitive astrologer. And last time you were here, Cara, you had mentioned some things to kind of look out for the election. So now that it's closer, I've had many of my listeners write in to say, when do we get to hear what's really going on? So thank you so much for being here today to go over all this stuff with us.
Oh, thank you. And congratulations on your 100th podcast. That's quite an achievement.
Thank you. I'm kind of really excited about it, So let's start off right out of the gate with Trump's health, because we've seen him with COVID now. He's been diagnosed and was in the hospital for a few days. Now is back at the White House. So what are you seeing in the charts about his health?
Yeah, well, gosh, it's fascinating. I mean, so Trump's health sector, so everyone's natal chart has a health sector. We look to the sixth house. And the ruler of that house, you can look and find all the different planets that aspect it, and you can kind of get a picture of what might be happening. And I'll say, when I first was looking at his chart, I wasn't reading it that way. But once the story started coming out, I went, oh, how did I miss that? Of course, he has the potential for health stuff because he's got a lot of really heavy transits that can impact health. So I know a lot of folks weren't really quite sure, was he faking it? Was he not? He really is sick. I am very convinced of that when I look at his chart. You can even see just in the chart in the sky itself, we had Mars, which can relate to fever and vitality and illness, squaring our planet Saturn, the planet of authority. So the days that he was announcing his sickness, even just outside of his chart in the sky, we saw this conflict between our leadership and health and vitality. So it's all over his chart, it's all over the sky. And I think we can really trust that this is a true sickness and that it's actually a serious one. Now, I don't know that it means, that he's going to be so ill that he can't serve for the rest of this term, but I do think it will have implications for him farther on if it doesn't sooner.
Yes. So the big question that everybody wants to know, and I know that we talked about this briefly before, was the election and kind of what to expect with the election coming up.
Yeah, it's quite a spicy year, isn't it, Renee?
It is a spicy year.
Gosh, when we got started with, in January with this serious conjunction, Saturn and Pluto coming together, just setting the tone for the next 30 years of, change in society. And so at that point, when we talked, I said, looking out at the election time, we've got Mercury retrograde, which makes communications go haywire. We have Mars retrograde, which can bring up aggression issues and, compromise our energy. And then also Mercury retrogrades in Scorpio, so secrets and old stories and information coming out. And then there's also this event in December called a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And this is basically the same lineup that we had with Al Gore and George Bush back in 2000. So I had made these predictions, like, we're not going to know who the president is on election night just based on these energies. And sure enough, I mean, we can already see with the Postal Service, we're not going to know who's president that night. So it's going to take a little while. Astrology, you can kind of try to figure out when we might know. My intuitive sense that it may be several weeks. What do you think, Renee? Do you have a sense of when we're going to know?
I'm right there with you. I don't think we're going to know in the month of November. If I had to guess, I'm going with December 15th.
So. Oh, good. In my mind, it's like November 30th.
Okay.
We'll see. It's definitely going to be a bit confusing for a while. And you can even see in both Trump and Biden's charts, them not getting good news on election night. They're having to wait. They're going to have to wait for the information. But, it's really good for your listeners to know that we're in a Mercury retrograde season for the election. Actually, Mercury will turn direct on the day of the election. So there's this, this pause when Mercury, is getting ready to shift and start moving forward. So there's going to be that tension in the air. And so it's really good for people to get their ballots in early. Maybe don't rely on Postal Service if you can go and drop it off in the mailbox yourself. Just anything you can do to work with Mercury a little bit better would be good.
Good advice. So on election date is when Mercury goes direct again.
Yes.
Wow. Is there anything else happening big around that date?
It will take a little longer for Mars to go retrograde. Mars will shift a couple weeks later, but it's also, we're coming off of a full moon that day, and the moon will be in Gemini, and it's going to be making aspects to Neptune. So there is this sense of what's going on. Gemini is trying to make a decision, the moon in Gemini. Neptune can cloud things. So the day in general is just very confusing, up in the air, lots of talking and wondering happening in the sky, but not really any clarity to come right away.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful, I guess. Of course we would all like clarity, but if we don't have it, we don't have it. So you mentioned this briefly a couple minutes ago, but last time you were here, you talked quite a bit about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that we're having, and I believe you said in December. Can you share a little bit more information about what to expect with that?
Yeah, this is an event that happens about every 20 years. And it corresponds again with the Bush Gore election in 2000.
Okay.
And so what's happening is these are two planets that are at the same sign and degree of the zodiac. And so their energies are kind of merged with one another in some way. And they're really different from one another. One is expansive, one is more contracting. And so there's this sense of something new that wants to be born out of this energy. It's kind of a catalyst energy, but Saturn usually wins out first. There's the restriction first, and then the expansion of Jupiter a little bit later. So that's happening. And so there's this sense, some people have looked at that and said, oh, there's this sense of, humanity shifting and changing, and this conjunction is going to kind of burst out something new. But I've got one of these in my personal chart, and I know it's kind of a pain in the butt for a while, because there's that tension that takes a while to get released. So we're seeing that in the sky. We'll all experience it somewhere in our lives, somewhere in our charts. And then Trump and Biden will experience it in significant parts in their chart, which we can talk about a little bit too. So there's just this sense of, this whole year, like wanting there to be change, but needing to go through the process first. And so we don't really see that major shift happen until after that conjunction really gets underway.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So I would love to hear more about Trump's chart.
Oh my gosh. There's so much that's been said, I'm sure, on Trump's chart. But, I think about the phrase, people say, or how he claimed he was a stable genius, right?
Mm-hmm.
People don't give Trump enough credit. He does have some flashes of genius. He is a fantastic communicator. I would call him an unstable genius. So, Trump is, he's a Gemini, and his Gemini sun is conjunct very close to the planet Uranus. So this is partly why he's so changeable and unpredictable, because Gemini can go lots of different directions. And then you add a really unpredictable planet Uranus in the mix, and he can just, fly off in lots of different directions. Surprise is really his element. And I think he surprises himself just as much as he surprises other people. He's like, oh, this happened. Okay. And now I'm going to figure out how to use it to my advantage.
That's a great, and as soon as you say that, of course you can see that. It's almost like, oh, I didn't realize this was going to happen. Oh, well.
Exactly. So, and Trump is very, we know he's changeable already, but his Mercury is in Cancer. So the way he communicates, what he thinks about, he's ruled by the moon. So every time the moon changes, every couple of days, his mood and how he communicates could change. So that kind of adds into the surprise and instability that he brings. But, above all, Trump is an entertainer. He's a Leo rising. We've seen that with The Apprentice. I mean, he works well being, a showman, being out on the stage. That was really when he was in his element. And now he's translated that into, the political stage, of course. But in terms of, you want to kind of probably hear a little bit of what's actually happening in his chart.
Yes. Yeah. So, right now.
For your listeners that aren't as, familiar with astrology, basically transits kind of point to events that are happening, or kind of when we're ready to experience different things in our kind of soul's journey. And so one of the big things that's happening for Trump right now is the planet Saturn is activating his Venus. It's in an opposition. So basically what this is doing, part of this is the storyline of his wealth and his taxes and all of that story coming out, kind of facing the karma of that time, or, some of those situations in his life, but it's also been activating the health story at the same time. So we see significant tension in this part of his chart. And we also see, and this is why I was waiting for some kind of surprise to come out, we also could see, Trump, the way Trump goes about things, and this is not going to come as a surprise to you, it's a bit more subversive. He has his power planets, Pluto and Mars, are in the 12th house, a place of hidden things. So he does things in secretive and hidden ways. And so there's also this activation of some of these, a surprise element to some of these secrets. So it's not a surprise that we're kind of digging deeper into, what's the real story here. There's several things that we're highlighting his financial stuff, and now it's been a bit covered up by the health story. But Saturn makes sure that we deal with our karma one way or another. So I think we're just getting started, and we'll see more about that actually next year. But that piece is going. And then the other big thing, Renee, is that Trump is preparing to have what we call a nodal return, and it's this kind of sense of your calling and like stepping up into a new level of your calling. So Trump really has some opportunity here with this transit. It's definitely something that is beneficial for a career and elevating yourself in society in some way, especially based on his placements. So that's something that's really positive for him. But of course, this is a soul journey. So we don't know, we're not sitting with Trump. We don't understand how all of the planets interact for him and what they mean for him. But you can see a lot of stress, a lot of potential change, though, comes out of stress and some things that could look good for his career, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and let's hope it's good change, because clearly, and I know that this is one of the major things that bothers me, and I'm sure many people in the United States, is his view on white supremacy.
Yeah.
And is there anything in his chart that can explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. You can see, so Trump was born at a full moon. He was actually born at a full moon lunar eclipse. And full moon people have a lot of stuff between themselves and other people. They learn a lot through conflict between themselves and others. So we see that, how Trump just kind of comes out ready to debate or quarrel or, get into it with someone. But in this opposition, we've got the signs of Gemini and the sign of Sagittarius for his sun and his moon. And so there's this sense of the other, tension between himself and the other that comes out of this alignment. So, it's not, when you look at his chart, you go, okay, yeah, he could be someone who's xenophobic. And I think we see that, truly played out in real life. I think in terms of the stirring up of white supremacy and the hate groups that we see coming out of that, I don't see that in Trump's chart as being such a reflection of a very challenged soul around race issues, but I see it more as him, the entertainer. Like I said, him with the Leo rising, and he has an audience and people like him, and he just kind of plays to that versus, someone like Hitler's chart. Trump's often compared to Hitler. That's someone with a much more challenged soul around those issues that's really coming out of that. Now, that's not to say that Trump could not incite more violence, as he's already done, incite more race issues. But I think, again, it would be more of an accident than like super intentional. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yes. And this it's very fascinating. I'm happy to hear that there are some differences between his chart and Hitler's chart, because sometimes, you start to wonder what's going on. But I see that, where I feel like he's playing that, like you're saying, an actor playing these issues up. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's another system that I use besides astrology, and it's called intuitive eye reading. And you can read people's archetypes in their eyes. And Trump is a sage in this system, and it's all about communication. And we see that reflected in his chart too. The systems go really well together. So yeah, they like to play on the stage and say things that are kind of audacious and see how people react. And, so that's what he does. He plays, he says stuff, sees what happens, and then, gets a good kick out of it. So I don't, and again, it's not to say that terrible things can't come out of his, from his chart based on the way he's playing to these, white supremacy cases, but I don't see it particularly being an intentional move to create major race issues in our country. But I could be wrong, but that's my
Right.
sense.
Okay, so that's some good information about Trump's chart. Now, what about Biden's chart?
Man, Biden. Okay, let me get my notes here. So Biden is a major Scorpio. He's got 4 planets in Scorpio. Yeah, I know he's an intense guy, but he comes across pretty quiet and mellow. And Scorpio is pretty introverted, or can be very private. So I think we see more of that side of him. When we look at transits to Biden's chart, we see we see his desire for power, and also like this needing to develop confidence in himself as a powerful person, or confidence in his own power. And we see that really under siege by the planet Saturn. So there's this kind of tug of war happening in his chart. And there's something similar in Trump's chart, but the narrative's a little different, where we see kind of Biden trying to expand his power. And we see that somewhat subverted or challenged by the planet Saturn, saying, do you really have what it takes? How much do you really want this? And I think Biden wants it really bad. I actually think Biden wants the presidency a lot more than Trump does. I mean, I think Trump doesn't want to lose face, but I don't necessarily, when I look at his chart, see him really wanting to do the work of the next 4 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I see Biden really, really wanting it, and I see that causing a lot of conflict. And I mean, you work so much, Renee, with manifestation. I mean, what do you see when someone really, really, really wants something and clings and holds to it so well? How does that work out for them?
Well, there's 2 parts of that, as we know, is probably why you're asking me. If you are making the determination that I am going to do this, that works out well. If you're holding on to or approaching it out of fear, and I hope this happens, and let me try really hard, but I'm not sure, that does not work out so well. So
yeah, that's some of the energy that I see there for Biden. It doesn't mean that he can't expand beyond that, but that's some of the test that he has right now. Another thing that's happening in his chart is the planet Neptune is in an opposition to his career sector. So Neptune is the planet of visions and dreams and what's possible. And there's tension between where he wants to go and that energy. So, there's a lot to him and understanding what his symbols are for him. We don't have him sitting here to know more about what Neptune is meant for him. But we see this tension, we see this tug of war happening in several different ways in his chart. And the vision and where he wants to go might not be, the vision of where he wants to go and where the planets are taking it might not be quite aligned the way I'm seeing some of the tension in the chart. If you look back though, Biden, of course, he's been vice president. So you look back to 2008, and I mean, that's a big thing, a big change in your career to, go from, I mean, still in politics, but, becoming vice president. And at that time, he had really helpful transits, really powerful transits that are more than I see this time, which I would expect to see more energy there, less of the challenging energy and a little more flow. But change does come out of challenge. So, it could still go either way.
well, I want to look at this in the positive light too. So maybe for some of us, he isn't as progressive and liberal in some areas as we would like to see as a leader. So maybe some of this will shift him to over more of the views that way too.
I think so. The other thing that's kind of interesting about Biden's chart is he's very, very creative. You can see he's got his moon in the 5th house. He has a lot of planets in the dreamy 12th house. So I don't know his full story. I don't know if he's an artist in any way, but I also see some stuff in his chart that's saying, hey, let's kind of shake this up and like get a little bit more loose, get a little bit more creative. Maybe that's some of what you're seeing too, like the open-mindedness and possibility.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
could pop open.
Exactly. Oh, that's good news. That makes me feel a lot better. So, so one of the things that I'm super curious about, especially with all of the change that is happening, that has happened with COVID, and I'll talk about COVID in a second, but is what's happening with our economy and our world and in the United States in general. So have you taken a look at the chart for the United States at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's pretty important times that we are heading into, and so the United States is actually preparing in the next couple of years to go into a Pluto return. So most people know about a Saturn return that happens every 28, 29 years for a person, but a Pluto return takes a heck of a lot longer. We will never live long enough to have one, but the country does. And so basically, we're kind of in the lead up to the American Revolution. So you think about the beginnings that our country was born out of: conflict, protest, taxation without representation. There's a lot of feisty energy that we were born out of as we were seeking independence. And so I'm already seeing that start to be echoed here in the United States. And you've got a perfect view from downtown,
Yes.
downtown Portland, of what's happening, and people are rising up and protesting and, making demands, rightful demands of our authority figures, all perfect themes for the year, as we discussed earlier in January. And so yeah, we're feeling the rumblings of this significant change that's coming, that this year kind of got underway, and then we'll see it in an even bigger way in another, I would say it gets most strong in about 3 or 4 years. It's this element of, it's all about power. Pluto is a planet of power and transformation, and so we feel these rumblings of change that are coming, coming for our country. So yeah, how have you been downtown, Renee?
Boy, I feel like I've had a front row seat to, the revolution, so to speak.
Yeah.
Their protests and everything is literally happening outside my window. So it's fabulous to watch it, but not have to be down there and be a part of it. The energy is a little intense for me as I'm older now to actually be a part of it down there. But I am so appreciative of the Black Lives Matters protests that we've had, and there are people almost every day in the square protesting and holding signs, and senior citizens, the raging grannies, all of them, they're down there. I don't think people see that as much on the news, but I see it happening. So it's very exciting.
Wow,
Yeah,
amazing.
I know. So this is kind of like you were saying, kind of like revolution energy in a sense.
It absolutely is. And
Mm.
and I'm thinking, you know, again, this whole Jupiter Saturn conjunction at the end of the year, there's this sense of constriction and then expansion. So it does feel like we're kind of in the womb, so to speak, and the uterus is contracting and putting pressure on us, and we're like, we want to fight out of this and experience our own vitality and our own energy, our own aliveness. So we're kind of in that constrictive space, and people are starting to to bust out. But it's a long process, and when people ask, oh, when will COVID be over, and what does this look like? And I don't technically know, but I know that the type of change that we as a people, we as a global society are being ushered into is one that we can't really go back to an old way of being, where there's no, it's only forward momentum. So I can't say exactly how long COVID will be keeping us indoors. Although if you look at the news today, President Trump's already saying, hey, let's get back to work. It didn't faze me very much. So, we'll see how the people take all of that. But yeah, we're in for a pretty long transformational journey, and we've all signed up to be part of it in some way.
Yes. Yes. Our souls, if we take this view, our souls knew what was happening before we came here this lifetime, and we agreed to come here and be part of it for our change and then the change that we can help with the world too. So
Exactly. And even difficult figures like President Trump, for a lot of us, they're reflecting back pieces of us, and that's what relationships do. And especially, the person who's the leader of our country. I mean, it gives us a lot to compare ourselves to, or compare how we react to different things. It's showing us parts of ourselves that we need to work on, or inciting in us our passions that we need to rise up about, especially around justice issues. So regardless of how we feel about the person in office, we can channel those messages that we get based on our reactions to those people, and hopefully use them for the greater good.
yeah. Well, I hate to say this, but what you're saying about the revolution and and the Pluto return being in the chart for the United States, that kind of tends to get me to lean to think that maybe Trump will be reelected then, because that honestly, that's one of the major things I think that would get people out there to really make change. So
Yeah.
what are your predictions for the election? I
Yeah.
know we don't have a crystal ball, but it's fun to guess.
It is. It is. And, I lean the same way as you do, Renee. And actually, so back in 2016, I predicted Trump would win that election as well. And part of the reason I felt like that at the time was because the, just look around America, and we got to look outside of Portland because we're pretty progressive here. But we're a nation of reality TV viewers. We kind of love
Yeah.
that titillation and drama that comes. And so Trump is the perfect show person to engage that kind of thing. So I don't think that those energies have particularly changed in the last 4 years. So I think he still has a bit of a command and an intrigue and an interest that he stirs up in a lot more people than we might even realize. So there's that. But yeah, I do. I think that for the type of change that we are looking for or needing as a society, we have to have a leader that's going to really rile up the people for that to happen. And so, it's possible that could happen with Biden, possible. But, Biden's a professional politician. He doesn't really shake things up. He kind of goes with the status flow. That's why he's the comfortable candidate to have pushed forward. Could he, if he wins, stir up some of Trump's base in a big way? Maybe, but I don't think as much as would happen if Trump wins again.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All I can say is like, wow, we better get ready for some rocking and rolling times, you know.
Oh, definitely. Well, here's a few other little things I have to say about Trump and the time ahead. So one thing I had mentioned before about the Saturn Jupiter conjunction years is that they often correspond with presidents that are elected in that year dying in office. And so there's this, it's not every year. The last, last 40 years, 40 years, yeah, hasn't happened. But times before that, we see a real strong pattern of this happening. So I'm looking at that going, okay, Trump's got COVID. Is this related? I don't know that it necessarily is, but I do think that he's going to have a significant change about 1 year from now. So when you look at his chart, there's another system of prediction that we use called solar arcs. And when I apply that system to his chart, we see major, major, major change happening about 1 year from now. So to me, it looks like good potential for winning the election, and then having massive change, relocation, facing his karma, major stress and strain, things that possibly relate to how his wealth has come about, really hitting ahead then. So I think it's, even though we have some sense of the energies, I think it's still going to continue to be very surprising, very wild in the coming year or so. And I also think that Trump is a person who, for his lessons, needs to fall down pretty hard to have them really, to really wake up. And he's actually someone who could use his power in a really wonderful way, should he choose to. So, I mean, he is an influential figure. He has some good traits going for him if he could, face some of the things he needs to face. So we'll see. But he has this thing looming about 1 year from now that I suspect could remove him from office if he wins, or at least have him face some pretty harsh realities.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I have no other words, but wow.
So whether it's a physical death, whether it's a psychological death, there's
Yeah.
some significant stuff coming for him.
Good. Good.
Yeah. I would say too, there's another little piece is that there's a lunar eclipse in December that's very impactful for Trump. So there's, again, this surprise change energy that is part of him. So, it's fun to try to make predictions, Renee, but he is such a surprising character. It's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah. Well, oh my goodness. So we have the election delays. We have this Jupiter Saturn conjunction coming in December. We have all of the surprises in Trump's chart. Um, Wow. So I guess we can just get ready for change.
Get
That's
ready for change. Yeah, exactly. And to know that change takes time,
yeah.
so a lot of us are wanting to get out of the house, and we're wanting to get back to business as usual, and especially like us entrepreneurs. I mean, we've got a lot of energy that we want to use, and Mars is retrograde right now, and we're rethinking how do we want to use our energy and our power in some way, and it's just a hard year to figure it out. So there's just kind of this pause where we're intentionally being forced to go a little bit slower and rethink things.
Yeah. Yeah. But that is when times of great change come. So, I'm in that regard, I'm excited for this time to see how we come out as better people, a better society. It may take a while, but at least it's leading in that direction. So,
I think so. And that's the perspective I take with all of my clients. When you see the difficult transits, the challenges in life, or maybe the things that are inherent in their natal chart around trauma that they might experience, it's like, this is the real stuff of life. This is where we learn and grow. So let's embrace it. Let's embrace it as people. Let's embrace it as a society and say, let's go into these uncomfortable places so that we can make change.
fabulous. Well, thank you so much again for coming here and being on my 100th podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Renee.
I've had lots of my clients that go to you for readings and say that you are just lovely and always right on with their charts too. So if you're listening and you would like to have a reading and your chart read with Cara, her website is carajames.com, and I'll put the link in the write up to the podcast. And thank you again. We will have you back in a few months to see how this all shakes out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Renee.